Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I am back with another video. Today's video is actually part of a blog hop for the 4th birthday celebration for SugarPea Designs. Their stamps are super cute. I don't get to use them nearly enough, and I didn't even show you all the stamps that I used. I'm sorry. I'm using their striped diagonal cover plate, and I'm also using tons of fun, the celebrate all the things, which I think is adorable. I totally talk like that. And then I also am using the Blow Me Away, which is the dragon that you'll eventually see. So what I was really drawn to was this diagonal cover plate. It was just one of those things that when I was shopping in the store, I was like, I need to have that. So I knew that I needed to use it. Like it wasn't a want, it was a need. So I decided to do some Distress Oxide inking for my background. I started with the Twisted Citron to the Squeezed Lemonade to Picked Raspberry to Salty Ocean. And I just figured that in order to create my rainbow, I was putting colors next to each other that would create secondary colors. So the pink and the yellow are going to create my orange. The pink and the blue are going to create my purple. So I didn't stress out about using all of the colors. I just used these couple. And then I always go over mine twice, which is what I'm showing you here. Just so you can see, I guess, how the intensity of the color came to be. I didn't really have any issues blending. I got a little heavy-handed with the pink. And so there was some issues, I guess, just a little bit. But because I used oxides, I was able to blend it out right away and it was fine. So I'm just sprinkling on a little bit of clean water here in the background. This diagonal cover plate is really going to be kind of like the star of the show. And so I wanted to make sure it was super interesting to look at. So after I did the clean water, I just did some Perfect Pearls in the color Perfect Pearls. I'm going to set that aside to dry. And in the meantime, I'm going to do a little bit of stamping. I knew I was going to fussy cut these out. So I wanted to stamp the cake in, it's really cute. It's drawn so that the flame is like bent as if he is blowing on the flame of the candle. It's adorable. So I just used my masks because originally I did a completely different card, which I have to tell you I didn't like. Yes, I do that. That does happen. I tell you don't give up and to finish them, but that doesn't mean that I always love them in the end, because that one I didn't. But anyway, so I had the mask there and I decided to use that just as a placeholder so I could get my cake correct, since that is in the forefront that needs to be stamped first. So once that was done, I went ahead and masked it, and now I'm just going to go ahead and stamp my dragon down. That way when I go to cut them out at the end, I can cut them out just as one piece. I did not mention it. I'm using Intense Black ink from Simon Says Stamp because that's Copic safe, and that's how I'm going to be coloring these little guys up. I used the elephant from the Tons of Fun set and his little balloon. I stamped all of them twice, and I stamped a couple of balloons. So now that this background is dry, I'm going to go ahead and run it through my Big Shot. I typically like to get my background done in the beginning, just so that way when I'm selecting my colors for my characters, I know what that background's going to look like. So this cut beautifully. Actually, the only ones that I had that stuck were the ones that were stuck to the tape. So I'm going to use I'm going to make 2 cards. Clearly you saw that. You saw the photos. This is no surprise to you. But I'm going to use the outside piece as kind of a template to glue down my other stripes. So Tembo Mono Multi-Glue is repositionable if you put it down after it's dry. So that's what I'm using on the back of this. And I'm just going to set that aside while I put foam tape. So this is just Scotch foam tape. And I'm going to put that on the back of every single striped piece. It actually didn't take that long. And I cut each one at an angle, and so that I could just use that angle to fit onto the next one. And just went through until they were all covered. I cut the pieces in half. So it wasn't too crazy as far as like cutting teeny tiny pieces. We'll get to that later. So now that I have this on my card base, I'm going to just peel off the foam tape, and just fit them in kind of like a puzzle piece, except part of the puzzle is popped up. That's all. And I think that this, every time I do this with a background where I fit the pieces back in and part of it's popped up, I always think like it looks so cool, but then I never think to make a card like that. So one of these days I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to just remove my template. It'll leave all my stripes in place. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this other one. This is where I got all the little finicky pieces because that frame on the outside is so tiny, but I needed it to be level. Like I needed there to be foam tape there. So I just, I cut them so thin that in fact some areas like the backing paper ripped. Like it was just like, I am not meant to be this small. So once all that was removed, I'm just going to adhere that to another card base that I have prepared. And then both of my backgrounds will be done. I can set them aside and then move on to the Copic coloring. So for the Copic coloring, I'm just using 4 cool grays. This is pretty traditional for me if you've been here before, to do my little elephant here. So his one ear is back behind his head. There's going to be shading there. There'll be shading where his, well, it's not a paw. What is it? His hoof? No, it's not a hoof. He doesn't have a, no. I'm going to call it his hand because I don't know what else to call it, guys. That's the truth. So where his hand would be up by his face, there would be shading behind that. There would be shading underneath his neck. There would be shading on his belly, where his leg is in front of it. I always add a little bit of shading, kind of like down into the left of their bodies. There would be shading on the leg. His, well, the way he's looking, it would be his left leg. It's tucked behind the other. And then for his trunk, I always add the shading to the bottom, but then it comes up. And so the lightest part should be where his trunk is curved. I did add just a little bit of shading because it's kind of drawn like a little, almost like a little curly Q where it's like tucked in on itself. So I did add some shading there and then kind of down. It's kind of hard to explain. Like, so from the little curl down, because you can clearly see how it's drawn is that it's tucked up in there. So that area would be darker. I also added just a very tiny little bit of shading on the left-hand side of his mouth. I worked all the way out to my darkest color, and with the darkest color, I'm only putting that in where the areas would be the darkest. So I'm putting that on that back ear, on the back leg, where his leg is covering up his belly, and then just a little where his arm, his face, and his neck meet. So now I'm just going to basically work back out to my lightest color. That's usually the way that I operate. I didn't want him to be terribly dark. I was trying to almost color him as if I was coloring a white object, where with white, you want to leave white, you're just adding in the shadows. I colored him almost the same way and then just filled in the rest with the C1, which is the lightest gray color, so that he would be very light. I have a tendency to be heavy-handed with my darker colors, and so I try to make a conscious effort to, I have to make a conscious effort when I want something to be lighter. So I'm using an RVOO to just color in his mouth and his little ears, and then I'm going to move on to the dragon. Now, I love this dragon. I think this dragon is adorable. I was immediately drawn to him. I think he is so super cute. And like I said, I did a card before this, and then I just didn't love it. So usually when I do a video, you guys are seeing me color something for the first time. That is not the case with Mr. Dragon here. I have colored him before, and basically his body is the same colors, but I changed up his mane? Let's just say hair. I don't think we need to be fancy here. I changed up the colors of his belly, his little scale. Are they scales? They're scales now. And his hair, because before I did them like a hot pink. So for the shading on him, he's clearly got these big puffy cheeks, which just kind of make me happy. And so I did add a little bit of shading kind of like in the bottom left, but I left a white edge. Back where his horn is, behind his eye, there's going to be shading. Up underneath his, I want to call it a snout, but I don't, it is a snout. It's a snout now. And then his wings, his back wing is going to be darker. I did add some additional shading. The way that that front wing is drawn, with kind of like the scallops, I added some darker edges where it comes in, just to give it a little bit of shape. I added some shading underneath where his neck is, underneath his arm. There's also going to be shading underneath where his hand's holding the plate. His back leg, I added it from the bottom up, and then also included just a little line where on the top of his foot, and then from his tail, same thing, from the bottom up, also where it butts up next to his foot. I'm going to do the same thing with the darkest color here. I'm only going to add this where I think it would be the darkest. So definitely where that back wing is, it's set behind. I did add just a little bit of darkness to the triangles I put on his wings. Again, the back leg will be darker because that's set further back. And then where his foot is sitting in front of his body, where those kind of 2 points meet. And then just working, same thing as always. Same thing as always. I'm sure you guys probably get tired of hearing me say it. I go from lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. It just works for me. So the majority of his coloring is going to be this YG03. And then just the highlights will be a YG01. So I'm just going back in, filling in those areas, being careful to leave a highlight. Especially like where the top of that front wing is, that's definitely going to be lighter. The top of his arm will be lighter. Where his cheeks are puffed out, the top of his feet, and then where he's kind of got duck face, where his lips are pursed to be blowing, though that's going to be lighter. And then after I filled it all in, I wanted to add a little bit of texture. Because these cards are next to each other. My elephant is very smooth. Side note, I did have to go back in and add a little bit of YG03 back into that wing. I didn't have a great blend there. So anyway, back to this texture. I went in with my colors blender, and all I'm doing is little dots. So this is in the art world is called stippling. I'm just doing a bunch of little dots. I'm going right over top of all of them. It's not like, I guess, very manufactured. It's not like when you do polka dots where you want even spacing. I'm doing dots all over, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't, and it's okay. But it's going to give him his body this look of having some scales. So from there, I really didn't know what color I wanted to color the rest of him. So I'm kind of like just killing time coloring other things while I try to figure out what I'm going to do. Like I said, on the other card, I did like a hot pink. And I really liked the hot pink, but I felt like the pink didn't match the pink I had in my background. So here's what I decided to do, which is a little bit different for me. I decided to go with kind of like the soft peachy orange that the squeezed lemonade and the picked raspberry made when they were blended together. I thought that it would contrast enough with the rest of his body that it would still look good. But as I was going here up to this point where this YRO2, why are things hard to say? It was looking good. We were doing good. I added a little bit of shading with an E13. And then this might have been my error because it started to look less bright and more brown to me. And I don't know what it is about brown and green together, but I pretty much just hate it. Like, I just despise it. I don't think it looks good. I don't like it. So it had too much of a brown feel for me. So I colored one of the balloons with that same color combination. I'm going to go in with this other balloon and use some pinks. So I just filled in the whole thing. I added a little bit of almost like a comma shape to the left-hand side and then to the bottom, and then blended those all out back to the lightest color. Now I'm going to use those same pinks to color in the icing on his cake. I did the lightest color on the side, some darker color on the top, and then I'm taking the lightest pink that I used and I'm going over that orange. So I'm kind of depositing like a brighter layer over it, and that kind of salvaged it for me. I'm going to use some blues to do this balloon and then also the candle on his cake. You'll see that there's that little flame. That's what makes the whole thing so cute, right? I am not going to cut that out, by the way. I am just going to add that back in once I have everything put together on my background. So I'm going in with a white gel pen. I'm coloring in his little nails on my elephant. And then I kind of brightened up the whites of my dragon's eyes. Then I added, because he has like these little spots drawn on his arm already, I thought that it would be cute to kind of add in a couple of little polka dots on his wing and on his tail. I also used that white gel pen to color in his toenails as well, because I did have some color bleeding. I like to outline all of my images, so I am going to do that before I start doing any of the fussy cutting. I just used an EK Success journaling pen. And then anytime you're doing fussy cutting, you want to make sure that you cut down your images to smaller pieces of paper so you're not pulling on the paper as you're cutting. I'm right hand dominant, so I'm going to hold the scissors straight up and down in my right hand, and I'm going to move the paper with my left hand. This will get you the smoothest cut. Now, there are some times when that can be a little bit challenging to do because you have a very intricate image like this dragon can be. Basically, he's a pretty simple shape. There's two areas that are a little bit difficult to get into, and that would be where his tail is and where he's holding that cake. So on occasion, I do have to make some smaller cuts by changing the direction of my paper and then go in from the opposite side just to be able to get into what I need. If you don't get a super smooth cut, don't stress about it. There's a way to fix everything, just like you've heard me say 100 times. If you need to mask any sort of kind of jagged edge that you have, this is a great way to do it. I am using a Memento Tuxedo black marker. You want to use a water-based marker, not an alcohol marker. An alcohol marker will bleed into your image, and you can do it one of two ways. You can hold it in your hand and go around the edges. I recommend going from the back side in case your marker slips. Or with something that is a little bit more intricate like this dragon is, you can put it down on a scrap piece of paper and then just trace around it. That will also deposit the black on the edges. Once I had all of that done, I'm moving on to my sentiment. And this is the Celebrate All the Things, which I absolutely love the title of. But I am using some Black Simon Says stamp paper. I am treating that with my powder tool, and I'm going to stamp it in Versamark ink. I'm going to stamp the Celebrate twice, and then the other two are going to be kind of like the add-on sentiments. I actually did stamp this twice because it was the first time that I had stamped these, and I wanted to make sure that I got a good impression. Once those were stamped down, I'm using just white Simon Says stamp embossing powder to go ahead and put that on. While I do all of this prep work that you guys watch me do, I always have my heat gun already turned on so that I don't have to leave it on my paper a long time, and I can avoid, I guess I should say I can create minimal warping that way. So once that is all smooth and melted, I'm going to go ahead and trim them into labels. And so when I started doing the backgrounds and I popped up everything, I was not thinking about how I was going to adhere these images. I was just thinking, well, I'll pop it up and it'll be totally adorable. And it is totally adorable. I did not make a poor choice there. But then I realized that I'm not going to be able to stamp on this background at all. So in order to have my balloons have strings instead of just floating in midair, I cut a couple, just a very short piece of just embroidery floss, and then I adhered those to the back of my balloons. Here I have everything laid out and I'm marking it with a pencil. Don't do this. Let me help you. I did it because I wanted to know where to put the foam tape. But from my angle, so the card is down in front of me. From my angle, I could not see the lines. However, as soon as I was done filming this and I picked the card up, you can very clearly see the lines, very clearly. So if I had to do it all over again, I mean, I had to go back in and erase them. What am I going to do, right? If I had to do it all over again, I would not do that part. I would just kind of eyeball it. Here, I put too much foam tape down, and then I ended up dropping my sentiment, and I had to go back in. It was just a very finicky process. I learned, like everybody has some, like one thing that they don't love about card making. And I've discovered why I always make one layer cards. It's because I don't like this part. This part frustrates me. The messing around and the trying to get everything adhered correctly. I guess I don't like fussy things. So there's something. It was like a life lesson. There's something I learned about myself today. So here I've just kind of slid in the foam tape where it needed to go, and then added Tombow Mono Multi Glue to all of the other areas where it will be flush with my background. The reason I'm showing you the putting together of the elephant is because it's the only one that's different. So I'm going to glue my little balloons down here, and I'm going to let those strings hang out. Once this little pink one needed to have some foam tape underneath it, but the orange and the blue one sat right on top of that line, and I didn't have any issues. Once that's done, I'm going to hold the balloons with my left hand, and I'm going to gather their little strings and wrap it around his trunk, and I'm going to use the foam tape that's back there to secure it. I did have to mess around with this just a little teeny tiny bit, but eventually it did work, and then I'm going to just add in a little bit more Tombow glue to make sure that his trunk stays down and that my string is secure. I did go back in and spread them out a little bit around his trunk, but other than that, that card was all done. I've gone ahead and put this one together here, and then I started putting down just like a glitter pen, and then it wasn't enough glitter for me. So I did the balloons, I did his little accessories. Here I'm going in with a regular eraser just to get up any of the sticky residue from where I dropped the other sentiment. And then now I'm just going to go back in with some Stardust Stickles. I really would have liked to use glossy accents, but honestly, I wasn't positive that the balloons wouldn't sag with the weight of the glossy accents. So I put the glitter on the balloons, I put the glitter on the main belly and spikes of my little dragon, and then I called it. So there's a bunch of giveaways on this blog hop, as well as a discount code, which I will link below if you're watching on YouTube. I encourage you to check that out. They're really wonderful people, and they have great products. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.